Hi, welcome to Shop Talk. I'm Jennifer Lynch.
Hi, I'm Jim Silver, and today's guest is Scott White, CEO of Driver Digital. Now, if you don't know Driver Digital, they're an award-winning studio. They're known for their Cool School brand, also for their work with DreamWorks and Mattel and many others. Scott, welcome.
Great, thanks for having me.
So, how did Driver get started? You started this a long time ago. You foresaw the future. What was the beginning?
Well, I think the beginning is that Driver started over about 20 years ago. We were a commercial production company, and we had been doing spots for Cokes and Pepsis and Microsoft, etc. We did a project for Coca-Cola, and the idea was we were going to shoot it, and we were also going to get an audience for it. We weren't going to take it to NBC, ABC, CBS to get viewership for this particular piece of content, and we got 10 million views for it. And when that came back, we thought to ourselves, how is that possible that you made a piece of content and that many people saw it? And with that, we really began to contemplate creating a studio that creates its own content and delivers that content not on cable in new media means.
What year was that started?
That started, if today is 2019, I'd say that we really started working with that in 2010, around that area.
YouTube wasn't big then, was it?
It wasn't. It was one of the places that it was one of the platforms that we were experimenting with. There was a lot of different ways to drive content, to drive viewers to content, and at that time it was one of the platforms we were looking at.
Did you have some difficulty there in getting people on board with kind of this new style of branding and advertising? And
Excellent, great question. So what happened is that we began to create our own content in Cool School, and we began to shoot it in New York and have a team around it that not only created the content, but also thought about how it was going to travel. And at that point, we had decided that YouTube was going to be the place that you were going to get the most viewership. So we began to put teams around the content that weren't just writers, producers, and directors, but they were writers, producers, directors, analysts, media buyers, and people that really understood how it was going to travel. Gotcha. So we began to do that for ourselves. And when Cool School reached around 3 million views, we got a call from Mattel. And Mattel said, hey, we need to reduce our cost of content creation and get distribution. Could you start doing some work for Thomas the Tank? And with that, we also, at the time, when Mattel called, we also had a tremendous amount of experience working with brands because we had been in the business of working with Coke and Pepsi and Microsoft and many, many other brands for years. We were Cannes Gold Award winning. We'd been on the Super Bowl. We've worked with many stars. So with that, the combination of success we were having in YouTube with our own kids' content and our ability to manage a brand based on our prior experience, I think that there was a good fit there.
Now, the way you create content is very different. You've told me a little bit about it, in which you actually look at the data, look at the research, and almost create content backwards based on what people are searching. Can you tell us a little bit about the methodology?
So I think that, so some of that's, it's still creativity. So you still have creativity and you still say, what's a great idea, what's interesting. But some of those creatives that are in the room might be media analysts, might be search engine optimization analysts. So when you create a piece of content, you still want that spark of something that's fresh and great and interesting. But from day one, you want to have a strategy by which you are going to get that content to scale. So that those ideas of that strategy will play an integral part in how those ideas are shaped or formed. So the idea may come from something really fresh, but you want to make sure that it's going to include concepts in it that are going to allow your analysts, your channel managers, your media buyers to drive viewership around that content.
So you created Cool School, your own brand.
Yeah.
It has about 5 billion.
I think it's about right now 4.7, 4.8.
Close enough. Close enough.
We call nearly 5
Right.
So how do you take an original content, how do you include the possibilities of merchandising the content and grow the entire package? I mean, it's almost like you're creating something with possibility of merchandising on the end.
Right. So I'll tell you, I've made a lot of mistakes.
We all have.
I've made a lot of mistakes, and it's been fits and starts of trying to figure this out. And part of it's because originally I didn't come from the toy business like you do. I think that the first thing is, I think it's hard enough to entertain people. It is hard enough to get viewership. So you got to kind of just get away from, get away from branded content, what you're going to sell, and just put your tap dance shoes on
The story.
and entertain
Yeah.
entertain people with a story. But I do think as we've progressed as a company, more and more we do think about what are the new characters that we're introducing, how are those new characters leveraging the platform, and what is in those new characters that could be toyetic and we could bring to retail. I think also one of the things that we also came up against, as you know, this is some of our mistakes, were that just because you have a lot of content and viewership doesn't mean you have a brand. It means that you have a lot of content and viewership. So last year, you know, this is going on while we're a company that works for all these brands. I never put the two together. We have to do that. So last year, I also think that we put in place our brand, like Think a Little Big, and what does our content mean, and what is the meaning of that brand, Think a Little Big. And I think with that, we've also kind of first focused on, let's get some viewership, but now we do really think about what are the products that can really work with our brand around Think a Little Big, and how can we drive relevant audience to the parts of the show that have toyetic content in it.
So you have me a little confused.
Okay, you can ask again.
And here's my $1 billion question.
Yeah.
So content creators, Disney's great, Nickelodeon's great,
Yeah.
but creating content for YouTube is different.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the differences?
I haven't had that much experience in traditional television. We've certainly done some of it. But I'd say the bigger differences are in creating content for YouTube. Here's what the same is. It's got to be entertaining. The second thing, though, is when you're thinking about that content, you are going to be creating much more content than you could ever imagine that you'd be creating on traditional television. The price points have to be much lower. The second thing is that you're going to always be in production. It's not like you're going to be in production and then you send it to a company that's going to distribute it. You are going to be in production, and depending on your philosophy behind it, certainly in our philosophy, that content is going to go up regularly scheduled once, twice a week, and you are going to get feedback from that. So your production teams and your creative teams are constantly in production. So I'd say that the big differences are, one, you have to be in positions to create much more content, so therefore the ideas have to be able to support much more content, and likewise your production dollars have to be much smaller, but likewise you also have to include marketing within it day to day, every single day, and you are up all the time. You're up once a week, and you're constantly also having a direct conversation with your consumer, meaning the person who's getting your content, they're either going to comment on it, so you're getting information from them, or analytically you're seeing, like, you know what, these people dropped off after watching 20% of the show. What are we doing wrong? Or they're watching all the way through and this really worked. That information is coming back, and within a month, it's actionable information.
As more people are watching on their mobile devices, we're seeing that vertical viewing as opposed to like horizontal is the format of people watching on their devices.
Yeah.
How is that going to affect YouTube, considering it is a very horizontal model for?
So here's what I'd say. I
Just
don't know,
your
but
opinion
what
on
I
it.
can say is this. When we film now, we're trying to be much more conscious of filming things in the center, meaning that if you wanted to make it a square, if it was horizontal, it's going to work horizontally, or if you wanted to make it, portrait or landscape, it's going to work landscape. It means putting the action in the center, so you're thinking about where somebody might be watching it.
There's so many toy companies and other companies that have brands, and they want to develop content behind their brands. We mentioned it's a lot more cost effective than TV. Can you compare the costs, the time process? How much less is it? How much quicker is it? What are the benefits of doing online content versus going the television route?
Okay, so I want to say, I have a bias. I think that online content, and we work with a lot of brands, and we work with our own brands, you need content that's going to support retail on a day-to-day level. Like, it's got to be out there once, twice a week. So we think that there's a real benefit to creating content, and you must be there in order to create content that a consumer can reach once or twice a week. I'd say that the difference is your production costs, one, are significantly less. I'm not going to sit here and talk about this studio or that studio, but they should be significantly less. I think also the content, when you put that production budget together in terms of cost, has to include the time for channel managers, analytics people, media buyers, in order that you can see what's going to happen with the content. I'd say another major difference is the speed. If we have a script and characters, we're up and running within 30 days. We can be up running 35, 30 to, let's say 30 to 60 days. If you have a script and a character, something ready to go. So you're in market really pretty fast.
When I look at YouTube, I see a lot of channels, without mentioning any names, that I look at the content and they're getting huge views. And I think you know where I'm going. It's like, we look at this and goes, this is awful. This is terrible. And it's like, yet people are entertained.
Correct.
It's like, what is happening that people are watching some of these things? And it's like, and why do they attract such numbers in its series?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So a couple things that I'd say about that. Like, what fascinates people is we don't really know. You can really just see that they're watching it, what fascinates them. It may not be something that you want your brand to be adjacent to. So cutting the understanding of scale of viewership plus something that you want your brand to be adjacent to or to be part of your brand is really a significant question for people that are selling toys, for example. But what people like, that's a mystery. That's, I'm the same as you. I'm like, wow, this thing's got a lot of views. I don't get it. But,
and it's just like somebody coloring or something for like 20 minutes.
Yeah.
So when you create content, and YouTube is global,
yes.
Is the focus for specific areas, and do you change the content for worldwide, or is it just something that, okay, you take your content, and it immediately becomes global, or?
I think it's a good question. So some of these are, this is where we wound up. I'm not quite sure that's the right thing, but this is where we wound up. So first of all, there's if you're really preschool, let's say 3, 4 and under, where language isn't part of it as much. So if you don't have language, you're naturally going to be more global than if you do have language. So most of the content that we have, which is in the 4 to 8-year-old category, does have language, and we really bend towards primarily the U.S. market, and then it goes to English-speaking markets. As we proceed and as we look at these global markets, I'm not saying we're looking at that as well, saying you have to be able to make it so it plays globally. You have to have that in your mind, and we're looking at that as well. We have some shows that are going to be in other markets, other language markets, much more in the traditional way where somebody takes a license for it and they're going to replace the character with somebody speaking their language. But I look at some of these other things that the language isn't so much of a part of it, and they're getting massive viewership globally. So we're really looking at how we can do that.
So we've seen how YouTube has really changed the way that kids are viewing and getting their content, and how brands are responding to that as well. Do you think that for content creators, where do you see YouTube fitting into the model of where they're putting their content out? We see them still kind of doing a mix of different things. Do you think that YouTube is still going to be rising and to the top in some senses?
Listen, I don't have a crystal ball. If any of us, I don't have a crystal ball, but I think at the moment, I think that a brand that has content has to think about what their content's doing on each medium. So Netflix and SVOD platforms have a purpose, and a part of that, I'd say, is support of retail. Listen, as cable continues to shift and that audience is available in YouTube, you have to kind of look more and more at YouTube, where you are not behind a paywall and you can influence that content in order to reach your consumer. you have to look at that more and more as part of the mix in order that you have content that's moving to the consumer all the time in order to help you support retail. So for the moment, I think you got to you have to have a piece of your content mix in YouTube. If you can be on cable, that's terrific. And certainly if you can be in SVOD, that's terrific. So I think you really got to be across the spectrum, and each one has its purpose.
Would you say then that YouTube is a good launch point, though, for starting a brand?
I think it...
Or a toyetic brand?
Here's what I'd say. I think it can be. But, we just saw Avengers. I mean, that seemed to work really well. So it looks like movies are doing pretty good. But I'd say that YouTube definitely, if you take it seriously, like you're really gonna get viewership around it and you put the effort in, I think it can really move the needle for sure. But it's, I think that there's a lot of ways to do it, and you could look at box office in theaters at this particular time of Avengers and say, well, that seems to be working really well.
Yeah.
So,
very true.
A couple $1 billion.
Yeah, exactly.
So I guess
So as you try to be a visionary and work ahead, what is the next big thing you're working on? Right now, what's your biggest focus of a type of program or something that you're working on at Driver?
So I'd say some of the biggest things that we're working on, it's more like leveraging what we see across the platform. Nothing radical, but so just things we brought up before. We're making sure that content coming into Cool School is toyetic. And we want partners that can help us put things at retail. So we're thinking about that as a studio, and we want to make sure that we leverage our audience. We're thinking about that. We're also thinking about how do we get our properties on SVOD. Just like I said that I think that you got to be everywhere, we happen to come up in the new media landscape. So we're making sure that we have things on toy shelves, and we're making sure that we're moving towards SVOD, and we have new and fresh content coming in the YouTube environment.
Yeah, it goes back to kids don't matter what device or what screen they're watching on. It's as long as they can access it.
Entertain them. Yeah. I do think entertainment is, when a person can just swipe away entertainment story, it's hard enough to entertain people. First start with entertainment, keep people focused, understand what their behavior is, entertain them, and then kind of follow with how you're going to leverage your brand into that.
As I talk to manufacturers, every single one is, we're creating content. Everybody's creating content. What is the biggest thing that you see that they're doing wrong? Is it not quality content? Is it a case that they're not looking at the data, they're not marketing it correctly? Because there's not a million series workings. There's not a million series working. There's a lot of them that aren't working. Right. What's the biggest flaw, the one mistake that you see most are making? So
I would say one thing, but then I flip that around. One is, let me answer. I think brands are getting better and better and better. They're understanding this better and better and better. If I could pick one thing, but I really think it's changing. I think they're getting better at it. It takes time to win this game. Like, you can't just jump in for a series of 8 pieces of content and get it to scale. You must think you've got to be in this to win this for a long time. So I do think that long-range planning and the brands that have long-range planning that can stay after it, change their content, move their content, really get to know their audience over time, can really hopefully get to something in time that has size and scale and meaningful. Short-term thinking is
this is not flipping a switch.
This is not flipping a switch.
The importance of A/B testing.
Yeah, it's not flipping a switch. But I also see some stuff, like, I don't want to quote what it is, but I saw this, Fingerlings thing. I think, I saw a quick clip from Fingerlings. I thought it was great.
Yeah.
I think they're going to come out, I think more and more brands are going to come out with really good stuff.
Scott, thank you for coming by Shop Talk.
It was great being here. Thanks so much.
Thank you. For more episodes of Shop Talk, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and stay tuned for more.